The last part of the conversation, I would like to focus on this thing called change management, because more and more when talking about the culture of innovation, I also get this feedback. Yeah, it's not too different from the change management that has been around since whatever the 80s, or at least since then we have been talking about it. And there's all kinds of methods and tools and frameworks for that. So is innovation different, or is it actually the same? Is it just a new label? And why? If it's different, why don't we then use the good things that also has some change management did offer and maybe still does offer? So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I mentioned them before. You've got things like GE's CAP, right? Their change acceleration process. You've got Kotter's 8-step change, the famous 8-step change process. And I think all those things it's like anything, management is still relevant to business today. Leadership is still relevant to business today, but you've got to figure out what the contemporary version of that is. So by default, organizations need to change, or as I mentioned before, I think it's now change for me implies a step from one thing to another. And I think that the world, this VUCA world that we all talk about, that we live in today, implies more of a consistent transition. So we're never really, using the analogy of stepping stones, we're never really step from one to another and then wait there for any length of time before we step to another one. It's this fluid, continuous transition. So if we can take the core concept of change management, but create a version of it that's continuous, that isn't about taking us from A to B over a time frame, then the good things about traditional change management still apply, just like the good things about management and leadership still apply. It's about applying it to the world and the context that we live in now, the people that we employ and the customers that we serve, and the new people that we're about to start employing with the next generations. And it's about creating, what my question to the audience is, what's the next iteration of traditional change management? And it's that next iteration of these methodologies which is right for today and maybe for the foreseeable future. So I think the bare ingredients of them are there, but I think it's now about applying it to a more iterative, constantly transitioning state rather than change from A to B.
You mentioned earlier on communication engagement as a third step. And I guess, in the end, we're all human beings, and we just all need this clear communication and the environment for us to be our best. So in that sense, nothing has changed really, but also it still seems that we haven't cracked the code for employee engagement, for proper communication. So in the light of the culture of innovation, is there any, best piece of advice you can give around communications and engagement?
So in terms of comms, you've just got to, if you think you're communicating enough, then turn it up even more, right? All our employees crave feedback. And the myth is that they don't want to hear us tell them anything negative. The reality is, when it comes to ideas and creativity and innovation, people just want feedback. Whether their idea has made it forward, or whether their suggestion has made it forward, or whether it hasn't, to some extent, it doesn't matter as long as we tell them. And we constantly talk about communicating, and feeding back to everyone that suggested an idea, or feeding back to everyone when we've taken something forward. But I still don't see evidence of us, doing enough of that as organizations. So, the first piece of advice is, if you even think you're communicating enough, turn it up another 25, 30% or 50%, because you can't communicate too much when it comes to innovation. And in terms of engagement, building that culture where innovation thrives is about engaging everyone. And engaging everyone in innovation means building the right mix of activity. So again, we still see organizations focused on their innovation efforts focused on what's directly going to drive revenue for the business. The reality is, if we want to build, a really high-performing, innovation-led culture in an organization, we've got to understand that not everyone can contribute to those types of problems or idea challenges. So we've got to create what I call the innovation mix. So how are we communicating to our people that we want them to solve and come up with ideas around product, but we want them to solve ideas around process, around experience, around logistics, around finance. And we want ideas that are really, really small and incremental, right up to absolute game-changing, forward-thinking things, and everything in the middle. And that middle ground is what I call differentiated innovation. So we've got to communicate that we want all of that. Otherwise, we still alienate people who say, well, the business just wants ideas for new products and I haven't got any of those ideas, so I can't contribute. And makes it really difficult to engage people if they don't feel as though they can contribute to the innovation agenda.
And again, if I'm the innovation manager, let's say I'm on this guerrilla tactic approach, what is your suggestion for me in terms of communication and engagement?
So the challenge, if you're doing things in a guerrilla style, the challenge is how visible you want to be. And that always poses an issue for comms, because you want to engage people and you want to communicate what you're doing. But then on the flip side, if you're trying to do things slightly under the radar, it makes it difficult. So the challenge is, I talk about starting with people who care. So how do you reach out? How do you communicate to the ones that you really know care about this stuff, and build that coalition of people that really want to do something different? And how do you communicate everything within that group? Only at the point, if you're doing things in a guerrilla style, only at the point where you've got something to share and you know that it's going to be, it's been well received. At that point, you can then open the floodgates and communicate everything out to the business. But if you want to do things under the radar, sometimes that makes internal comms a little bit difficult.
Anything else you want to add in terms of your experiences, good or bad, that you have seen the last, couple of years?
I think the organizations that, one of the key things that I still see, and I've been with clients this week, and this is still prevalent, is senior leaders have to start shifting their focus from short-term gains to long-term capability and cultural transformation. And the short-term gains that they seek today will be, they'll get 10 times the amount of those small, low pieces of low-hanging fruit or small, bits of innovation. If they build capability across the organization, they'll actually get 10 times the amount of those as a natural byproduct of that culture that they create. So my advice for leaders is, don't get caught in the trap of asking your innovation teams and your chief innovation officers, or whatever title you have, don't keep them in that trap of delivering those short-term wins to prove to the business that this drive for innovation has value. But because they then deliver these really nice little short-term wins, you then go, oh, just give me more of that, give me more. And you never let them, they prove the concept that this whole drive for innovation works. You never let them, you never let them finish that experiment and then say, right, build that as a cultural capability. What I keep seeing is organizations and teams getting held in that trap of, you've delivered us 2 brilliant products, you've proved this innovation thing works, go and give me more of that. And I'm finding that innovation teams are being held in this trap of becoming the deliverers of innovation rather than the facilitators and the drivers of innovation capability. So I'd really like to see senior leaders understand that it's a really easy trap to get caught in. and the enlightened ones are the ones that break out of that trap.
Any ideas on the future organization? It sounds like you mentioned some building blocks of what innovative organization looks like, in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on?
Yeah. So I have thoughts on how. So if we understand that design thinking is one of the core parts of an innovation process, or one of the core methodologies and approaches to driving innovation, one of the things that I think is going to be really important over the next few years, and this comes out of a piece of work I was asked to do by a CEO and a senior team a few years ago. And they said to me, look, Cris, we're implementing lean and agile and design thinking and all the things that we want organizations to do. We're implementing that in the business. Our challenge is, we can do that, and we can sign off budget, and we can put people through those courses, and we can build those capabilities. But what can we do as a senior team? We acknowledge that we need to transform our organization, but what do we need? What should we transform into? What do we need to the organization to become if these activities and behaviors are fundamental to driving real growth, exponential growth over the next few years? So I took the design thinking process, which if you forget the plethora of whether it's a 3-stage, 5-stage, 7-stage, if you take the core elements of design thinking, the design thinking boils down to unearthing a problem, creatively solving that problem, and then getting the solution back into the hands of who suffers from it. So getting that solution to market. So I deconstructed that and said, if you wanted to design the next iteration using design language, if we want to design the next iteration of your organization, and you want design thinking and lean and agile at the heart of your organization, doesn't it make sense that you redesign your organization around those principles? So if you take unearthing a problem, creatively solving it, and implementing it as the 3 core stages of that process, I built a framework called the Next Generation Organization. And the framework is those 3 core elements, but imagine a Venn diagram, the sweet spot being in the middle. So my challenge to that senior team was redesign your organization around these 3 core principles. The first one being, if we want to get better at unearthing problems and finding problems, we've got to become more intelligent as organizations, and not just more intelligent about our customers and our sector and our industry. We've got to become more intelligent about the whole world. We've got to become thought leaders on many, many different subjects, because what we're now finding is completely random organizations, technology, sectors are having demonstrable effects on our industry. So an example, when automated vehicles come into play, it's not just going to affect the car industry, it's going to affect the auto insurance industry, the car finance industry, the car repair industry, etc., etc. So we've got to now start to think much broadly about the sectors and the influences that will affect our businesses. So how do we become more intelligent? If you imagine then building that skill and moving to the next skill, which is how do we then solve those problems? I think the challenge of solving problems is really a collaboration one. How do we collaborate better internally? And how do we collaborate better externally? And what does that look like? And then the third component then is, if we can unearth much deeper, more valuable problems, and we can solve them much more creatively and much better, how do we get those solutions to market faster? So how do we become more adaptable? How do we put things like design thinking, like minimum viable product, proper testing in real environments, etc., etc.? How do we build those capabilities to get products to market faster? And the challenge is, if you look at those 3 components, around 60% of senior teams still admit that they don't understand their customers well enough. And this was born out of a report, a research project that I commissioned to build this framework. So we've got to get those organizations to be more intelligent. Again, around 55 to 60% of senior teams admit that their organizational structure hampers idea sharing and creativity and different thinking. And the really, really key one is the final one, which is, again, around the same type of number, 55 to 65% of big, complex corporates globally still take, on average, the same time to get a new idea to market as they did 5 years ago. Now, if you think of the pace of change and the pace of world, they're actually slowing down at getting new stuff to market. So my advice is, off the back of this work and what I did with this one organization, senior team, if we want to redesign our organizations, let's redesign our organizations around the behavior and the skill and the capability that's actually going to drive innovation. And that's where that next generation framework came from.
Excited to hear and see more of these organizations, Cris. Thanks for your time today, and speak soon.
No problem. Thanks, Hans.